Imagine that the only thing that brings joy to your life is getting good grades and being the top student in the class. However, despite not getting into trouble or having friends, a certain boy insists on bothering you, but he didn't know that you could defend yourself very well. In a very strange way, being involved in this horrible cycle that exists in many schools around the world leads you to form good friendships with others who suffer the same, and thus, there are many twists in your life, including losses that make you lose your footing. The story begins with our protagonist angrily getting up from his desk and heading toward a classmate, ready to hit him with a book. Then, the scene cuts to 13 days before this incident, and we get to know the routine of the main character, Seun. His life revolves solely around studying hard. Every minute spent away from books is time wasted. This dedication resulted in him taking first place in his school's internal math competition. However, even though he was practically invisible, as Seun wished to be, he suffered from the common issue in many institutions, being bothered for no reason by a specific group of classmates. Yangbin can be considered the leader of this group, and he didn't like it at all when the protagonist warned him to be careful, as victims usually don't stand up for themselves. However, Seun is not easily intimidated. Before a fight could start between the two, the school's athlete group appeared in the room looking for Suho. It turned out that this boy had hit on a girl who was dating the leader of the athletes, and of course, the guys wanted to confront him. However, they didn't expect Suho to be very skilled in martial arts. He even used to fight, which allowed him to handle all the boys by himself. Later at home, we see the protagonist talking to his father, who seems very proud of his son's academic success. It appears that Seun's parents are separated, and the boy lives with his father, while his mother teaches. In her recorded classes, the protagonist takes the opportunity to enhance his knowledge, and perhaps seeing her through a screen makes the longing of not having her around lessen. Being a single father involves some extra expenses, and since he is a team coach, the man spends weeks traveling with the group, often leaving Seun even more lonely. The next day, as usual, the protagonist arrived at school very early. However, in the classroom, Seun found Suho using some desks as a bed, and while he might have cared about his classmate, it would have wasted his extra study time. Later, we see the protagonist in physical education, and unfortunately, Yangbin didn't heed his advice to leave him alone. The boy ended up taking Seun's sports shirt and disappearing with it, leaving the protagonist only with his sweaty clothes, which led to jokes from the same group that caused it. Suho, like the other classmates, heard the jokes, but unlike the rest, he told them to shut up, resulting in sudden silence, as no one expected that. In the locker room, another conflict arose when Seun decided to put an end to the situation. He approached Yangbin to tell him to stop, but it ended with the boy grabbing the protagonist by the neck, stopping only when the teacher arrived to ask if everything was okay. In the next scene, it's nighttime, Seun is already home, and we can see some marks on his neck. The boy is studying when suddenly the doorbell rings, and it's Suho. In this scene, we discover that the boy works as a delivery person and goes to school right after finishing his deliveries so he doesn't have to wake up later and risk being late for class, making it easier to be there. This encounter seems coincidental, as Suho was really surprised to see Seun right in front of him. Unfortunately, the food wasn't for the protagonist, as Suho had gotten the address wrong. The next day, a new student is introduced to the class, and his name is Suk. On his first day, Suk could already sense something was happening between Yangbin and Seun, as they almost got into a fight again, which only didn't happen because Suho subtly intervened. However, at night we see Yangbin with his friends at a club, and there, amidst drinks and illicit activities, provided by his cousin Sukdae, Yangbin has the great idea to affect the protagonist by targeting his grades, the only thing he cares about. Yangbin took a sticker from Sukdae that, when placed on the skin, makes a person calmer, disoriented, even nauseous, and sleepy, which would be perfect to use on Seun during the mock exam. Before putting his plan into action, Yangbin talks to Suk and mentions knowing how much he suffered at his previous school. Thus, he offers Suk protection in exchange for doing him a small favor, sticking a sticker on the protagonist's neck. I believe that out of fear of becoming the one who suffers at Yongbin's hands, Byung-suk agrees, and right after completing the task, Seun starts feeling sleepy, dizzy, nauseous, among other symptoms. Being smart, our protagonist quickly realizes something was stuck on him, but by then, the mock exam time was almost up, and to make the most of the last minutes, Seun starts slapping his own face to wake up. Later, we see that unfortunately, the protagonist ended up making more mistakes than expected due to the incident, and in a moment of losing his temper, Seun just gets up, grabs a book, and heads toward those he was sure were responsible. Then, the protagonist starts hitting Yongbin's face with the book and stabs Taehoon's hand with a pen, stopping only when Suho tries to divert his focus, and then the teacher returns to the classroom. In the next scene, we see the teacher accompanying Seun to the hospital as his guardian, since the protagonist's father is traveling. Everything could have ended badly for Seun if he hadn't collected evidence from Yongbin's backpack, where there was a box with the painkiller the boy had stuck on him. Since the school predictably wanted to cover up the case, it ended with Yongbin being expelled and Seun getting away unscathed. When the protagonist returns home, his father is already there, and the man even questions why he's injured. However, Seun lies that he got hurt in physical education, and of course, the man doesn't believe it, but he can't force his son to tell the truth. The next day, even without Yongbin at school, the rest of the group wants to settle the score with Seun. However, as the protagonist locks them in the bathroom with him and clearly knows how to fight better than the two, the boys quickly give up on starting a fight. Now, Seun became famous among his classmates, however, he doesn't want any attention. In fact, being invisible would be even better, so he pushes away anyone who tries to get close. Meanwhile, Yongbin asked his cousin Sukdae for help, and willing to pay for a service, the tall and strong boy agrees to teach Seun a lesson. The next day, our protagonist regrets trying to hit Suho while he was calming the fight the other day, so Seun starts being nicer to the boy, who seems like a good person. At the same time, we see that Sukdae, besides selling those illicit items and getting involved in paid fights, also seems to participate in running a betting site focused on minors and low-income individuals. Back to the protagonist, Byung-suk tries to apologize to him, but Seun doesn't accept it. Then, Yongbin appears at the school exit with his cousin and their friends. The protagonist is taken by this group to another location, and sensing something was going to happen, Byung-suk decides to ask Suho for help, as the boy knows how to fight well, and since Suho didn't seem very willing, Byung-suk offers to pay for the service. Switching to Seun, we see that he knows how to handle the group attacking him, but it really becomes unfair considering Sukdae's size, so it doesn't take long for the protagonist to be on the ground, with Yongbin taking advantage of it. Soon, Suho arrives to help a potential future friend, and after both groups take hits from each other, Sukdae gets tired of the endless cycle. But before leaving, Seun tells Yongbin once more to let go of the grudge for both their sakes. Despite everyone being sore, Byung-suk, Suho, and the protagonist end up going to a restaurant for dinner. However, before that, they help the owner with orders, deliveries, and cleaning, as she is Suho's aunt. Meanwhile, we see Sukdae and his group with who seems to be their boss. This man, who is introduced to us, would be like the owner of the kids and that betting site. Being a huge scammer, he sees an advantage in the situation that happened earlier, so he breaks Sukdae's arm and plans to use the fight to demand money from the trio, claiming that his best employee ended up like that because of them. In the following days, the new trio of friends grows closer, and for the first time, we see the protagonist seemingly having fun. Later, when he was heading home, it starts to rain, so Seun stops at a convenience store to buy an umbrella. However, there he ends up meeting the girl who is part of Sukdae's group, and unexpectedly, she is very nice to him. Yang-ai is a bit unpredictable, and after demanding a ride under the protagonist's umbrella, she invites him to dinner. At the place, the girl ends up giving her number to Seun, even though it seemed he didn't care to have it. The next day at school, right after gathering his belongings, Yongbin asks to talk to the protagonist in private, who only agrees in a room with his friends present. There, Yongbin kneels and apologizes, begging Seun to follow him somewhere else, using a flimsy excuse, and at that moment, I already felt it wasn't anything good. In the end, the trio followed Yongbin to a parking lot, where they ended up cornered and were introduced to Gil-soo, who put his plan to extort money from them into action. Over the days, each of them noticed they were being followed everywhere, and as the deadline to pay a large sum approached, the boys grew more desperate. So, thinking about everyone's well-being, Byum-suk, who comes from an influential family in the country, decides to sell one of his watches to raise the amount. Meanwhile, the protagonist was talking to Yang-ai, who seemed very willing to reveal everything she knew about Gil-soo, as she no longer liked the life she was leading and couldn't just leave it. On the last payment day, Byum-suk presents the amount they were supposed to pay, however, the other two boys don't want to go down that path. Soo-ho wants to call the police, and Seun wants to get Gil-soo arrested. Thus, the trio and Yang-ai plan a way to bring the authorities to the place where all the evidence of the illegal activities is. First, Soo-ho will be taken there, and when he's at the center of it all, the boy will send the location to Seun, who will arrive with the police. But not everything goes as expected. Soo-ho is discovered in the car, and Gil-soo just waits for them to get home to deal with the boy. Consequently, when Seun and the police arrive at the house where everyone was staying, there is no more evidence, and only a few drops of blood are found on the floor, which worries the protagonist, as Byum-suk was the one who warned him about the plan, and the boy feared something might happen to Soo-ho, as the blame would fall on Seun. Byum-suk also ended up being caught by Gil-soo on the way. The boy tried to hand over the money in exchange for Soo-ho, but in the end, both were now tied up in what seemed to be an abandoned park. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, please like and share to support me. See you next time.